this is really something that's pretty basic. If any other outlet on television, in print media, were to run ads for drug traffickers, it would be the end of that outlet. And we don't see any repercussions or accountability for these companies when they do the same thing. And it really should be, there should be outrage among other traditional media who have to play by completely different rules to monetize their, in some cases, their struggling platforms, their struggling websites, while companies like Meta are allowed to repeatedly run ads for things like illegal gambling pushed to kids, drug trafficking, weapons. These are all things that we've identified ads for, and yet there are no repercussions for that.
The Amber Mack Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome to the Amber Mack Show. On today's show, the latest on OpenAI's new AI-only TikTok clone, which sounds like a sloppy nightmare. We also talked to one of the leading experts on tech transparency and how to hold social media companies accountable for their actions. And Jeff, you're going to talk about how scammers are spending millions of dollars on forbidden ads, which is a frightening reality today.
Yeah, it sure is. And that'll be coming up later on in the other Mac. We're also going to discuss the AI actor who's taking on Hollywood and how much money President Trump has received from media companies and legal settlements so far. And the amount is probably going to shock you. So let's get straight into the headlines.
News feed.
Meta has been going hard into AI and recently admitted that they will be using the conversations that users have with any of its AI products, with the exception of WhatsApp, to target ads at you. Well, Meta obviously already does this with your other interactions on its platforms, Jeff. It seems like AI conversations could be a lot more personal than the sites that you visit on the web. And I do want to add that there is, of course, no way to opt out of this.
Of course, there's no way to opt out of that. That is not a surprise at all coming from Meta. What was sort of a surprise and what's fascinating that I read recently is that Goldman Sachs chief data officer recently said that AI training data is starting to run out, with most of the open internet already having been scraped, and this will inevitably slow AI progress. So the alternatives are for AI companies to secure proprietary data. And this is why almost everyone involved in AI wants you to opt in so they can get your personal data for that training. Or, barring that, start training on machine-generated content, which is one of the reasons you're seeing such an acceleration of slop out there, including things like Meta's Vibe AI-generated video platform.
Oh my goodness. Yes. And we should add, like we teased off the top of the show, that OpenAI has gotten into that game too, recently launching its Sora app, which is basically a TikTok clone that uses only short form videos created by its AI. This announcement got a lot of negative response online, including runner Tushar posting the following on X, and quoting here: Sam Altman 2 weeks ago said this: "We need $7 trillion and 10 gigawatts to cure cancer." Sam Altman today, and quoting here what Runner said: "We are launching AI slop videos marketed as personalized ads."
Yeah, I mean, those are two very different things. And I'd say Sam Altman, should say Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, responded to that with, I get the vibe here, but we do mostly need the capital for build AI that can do science. And for sure, we are focused on AGI with almost all of our research effort, end quote. And it seems, in addition to that, all being written in lowercase letters and not quite English, it seems a bit bizarre to me that OpenAI is trying to cover its insane data center costs needed to run its AI by, running its AI more to create slop. But at the very least, it looks like the costs of these things are going to go up in the future because they're starting to face some real cost pressures because this stuff is expensive and the investors are starting to look for some of their money back.
Yeah, I just don't get what these guys are thinking with these AI driven social spaces. I mean, it's just a total nightmare and unnecessary. We should add that on the science front, Thomas Wolfe, co founder of the AI startup Hugging Face, has recently pointed out how today's chatbots are not going to be able to do much for science for a couple of reasons. First, saying that chatbots are far too agreeable to make the challenges required for scientific discovery, which is really interesting. Second, that they're basically designed to predict what the next word in a sentence will be, which runs counter to scientific discovery. So often coming from looking where others aren't. So, a really interesting perspective that I haven't thought a lot about.
Yeah, and I think he's got some points there. You can see, scientists who are discovering things are constantly challenging other people's suppositions and are pushing back on things and trying to do things a different way that's never been done before. None of those things are what chatbots are doing. And obviously, AI for science may be different than chatbots, but they seem to be sinking their time into the chatbots and video creation stuff. Uh, so it does make some intuitive sense that if AI is running out of training data and being forced to train on its own slop, that's not the place that you're going to find scientific progress. And let's face it, most of the work being done in AI, it's not aimed at helping humanity. It's more like a great example is a recent story that's got SAG-AFTRA and a lot of actors up in arms. Is AI is more likely to be doing things like creating Hollywood's first AI actor, Tilly Norwood.
Yeah, this story has been trending online. So, if you haven't heard about it, Tilly is a creation of Particle 6 Productions, who debuted in an AI commissioner comedy sketch from the company that you could watch on YouTube. And while some of the animation is certainly impressive, a lot of it still looks off. So, it's really hard to see the value that this brings, other than maybe just cutting costs and reducing hassles related to actors. Although this really does seem like a fly in the face of a recent post from Particle 6 claiming that the virtual actress is not a replacement for a human being, but a creative work, a piece of art. I've not seen this much BS in 1 week of tech as we are this.
I so struggle with AI creations being described as art. I mean, anyway, but the bigger problem, and one raised by a lot of people in the industry, is that Tilly, that AI actress, would almost certainly have been created and trained by illegally consuming and analyzing reams of copyrighted content. And it's the work of human actors who aren't compensated for that. The studios aren't compensated for that. And so you're taking somebody's work and using it to train something to put that person out of a job. And that just doesn't seem to be a winning equation for me. It's certainly not going to win in the PR race.
Absolutely. We should also say that when we talk about OpenAI's AI app, Jeff, I saw that one of the most popular videos so far is of Sam Altman running around stealing things. So there is some retribution that is happening in these social spaces, which is kind of good. Now, speaking of video content, it looks like yet another big US company has decided to settle a lawsuit from President Trump. This time it's Google's YouTube, who paid $24.5 million because at one point, if you remember, it had suspended Trump's YouTube channel after the January 6th Capitol riots because it was concerned about the ongoing potential for violence.
And, what kind of excuse is ongoing potential for violence to cut somebody's YouTube account off? It's a pretty freaking good excuse if you ask me. So now we've got CBS News having paid $16 million to Trump. Meta's paid 25 million. Disney's paid 16 million. X has paid 10 million. Paramount Global has paid 16 million. I'm sure there are others, but they total over $90 million of settlements of lawsuits brought forth by Trump, the president of the United States of America, towards big tech companies and media companies just in the past year. So $90 million that these tech and media companies have paid to the president to to buy his favor. These are not cases that Trump was going to win, or that's at least the legal opinion of most people. So it's a very scary way for these big important companies to be conducting themselves.
Yeah, no kidding, and what a way to get richer. I mean, yeah, unfortunate. Speaking of unsavory people who are making too much money, Elon Musk has become the first person to have a net worth of over $500 billion. And because most of this is based on stock holdings, he often pays very little, and we should stress sometimes nothing in taxes. In fact, even though Tesla was valued at about $1 trillion and had US income of 2.3 billion in 2024, and this is shocking, it paid no federal tax whatsoever that year. So there's something a little bit broken about this model and system.
There sure is, and I think in the case of Tesla, I don't think they paid any federal tax, 2 years before that either in 2022. Musk has had multiple years where he's paid no taxes whatsoever. So there's something that needs to be fixed about this. This is how the rich become richer, and it's not based on helping anyone else. It's just based on helping themselves, getting enough power so they can change the system they're working in to further empower themselves. And it's happening all over the place. Obviously, it's happening. The president's doing it. Musk is doing it, and it's just it's no way to run a government or a country. But let's hop across the border to a country that is has recently become better run, as far as I'm concerned. In Canada, as the Logic reports, a Colorado-based startup called Electra, that's backed by Bill Gates and Amazon and some other clean funds, is looking to build a $910 million clean iron plant in Canada. So this is supposed to strengthen the supply chain around steel and stuff like that, create a bunch of jobs and slash emissions. So that's good news as far as I can see.
Yeah, that is fantastic news, and what a great project. Hopefully, it will be able to work its way through the approval process. That's one of the things I think Canada is still a little bit slow at, but I do have a
Mhm.
little bit of hope that that will happen more quickly. You know, we just had Minister Solomon, the Minister of AI, on the show last week, and they have this AI task force, and they're only giving them 30 days to come up with recommendations. So I'm
Good.
excited to hear these sort of shortened timeframes in terms of doing things in Canada. It should be noted that when we're talking about that project potentially coming to Canada, this is in the face of the US Energy Department basically banning any discussion of climate change, telling employees not to use the following terms in internal or external communications. This is shocking. They can't use climate change, emissions, energy transition, green. I mean, that's just a color, decarbonization, sustainability, and more.
Yeah, it is absolutely nuts. And again, this is from the people who were complaining about free speech. I don't, it's like the Princess Bride, that word you're using. I don't think you understand what it means. That's hardly free speech when you are dictating to, people who are maybe scientists and things like that, that no, no, you're not allowed to say these words. It is exactly what they claim their problem was with the woke left and all this stuff is the censorship of speech, and it's why Elon Musk inevitably or allegedly bought Twitter, and now they're trying to close down speech at levels not seen before, or not seen in recent years, at least in the United States or Canada or many Western countries. So just crazy. But and in other interesting news, the Chinese founded fast fashion giant Shein, I think
Sheen,
it's
Sheen.
pronounced.
You probably wouldn't know how to pronounce it, but, a lot of, young women I know are, big shoppers of Sheen.
I like my fashion slow, so, slow in
Alright,
that it's probably from
first
the
had to go and
'70s
check
or
that.
'80s. But, they plan to open their first bricks and mortar, shops in France this November, which is a bit of a reversal from, the typical real world companies moving online, but kinda cool, but there's definitely some local backlash, so we'll see how that works, but it's a pretty big story, and I wonder what it has to do with, tariffs or anything like that, but, anyway, early days, but let's see how it goes. I hope in some way helps them improve their terrible environmental impact, at least.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of violations happening on that front. Sticking with Europe for a final story, a Dutch court has ordered Meta to allow users easier options to make it so their timelines don't rely on profiling. This sounds good, but there are more sinister things happening at Meta, like how scammers are spending millions of dollars on what should be forbidden ads on Meta's platforms. And Jeff, you're going to talk about that next in The Other Mac.
The Other Mac.
I recently came across the Tech Transparency Project's latest report, Meta Awash in Deepfake Scam Ads, which uses data from mid-2025 to paint a pretty disturbing picture of Meta's tolerance for harmful ads that, according to their own rules, should not be permitted to run on any of their platforms. The reasons behind their relaxed attitude could be many, but the easiest to understand, most obvious, is the amount of money that Meta makes by allowing these ads. For example, just in the period between April 3rd and July 1st of this year, the Tech Transparency Project found 45 advertisers running scam ads, spending over $18 million in those 3 months alone. And that's just from the fraudulent ads that the report writers could easily identify. So what kind of ads are these? Well, most of them are deep fakes of Trump or Musk or Bernie Sanders, AOC, or other politicians promoting non-existent government programs, often targeting seniors. And although Meta claims it has invested in scam prevention and prohibits these types of ads, they nevertheless approved all of these scam advertisers, allowing them to run ads for weeks without taking action, and in some cases only shutting them down after the scammers had spent over $1 million in ads. And what are Meta's ad policies? Let me read them verbatim for you. Quote, advertisers can't run ads that promote products, services, schemes, or offers that use identified deceptive or misleading practices, including scams to take money from people or access personal information. We do this to protect people from being taken advantage of by advertisers, end quote. Great. But like so many big tech policies, this seems like something to point to pretend the problem has been handled, more than a reflection of the actions of the company that put those policies in place. And it's not just the Tech Transparency Project. In May 2025, the Wall Street Journal published a piece saying that Meta's scam ads are getting worse, noting that, quote, current and former employees say Meta is reluctant to add impediments for ad buying clients who drove 22% increase in its advertising business last year to over $160 billion. Even after users demonstrate a history of scamming, Meta balks at removing them, end quote. The article continues to say that Meta is, again I quote, a cornerstone of the internet fraud economy. As Senator Elizabeth Warren, one of the politicians who had deepfake scam ads made in her image, said, the only thing worse than these deepfake AI videos being used to scam Americans is the fact that Meta makes tens of millions of dollars off those scam ads. In addition to imaginary government programs, there are also tons of fake investment ads using deepfakes of people like Warren Buffett, and a group of 42 state attorneys attorneys general in the United States are calling on Meta to do more to prevent these ads, which have resulted in the loss of hundreds of millions of dollars by unsuspecting Meta users. That many of these ads target seniors is especially disgusting, and the fact that they often use politician deepfakes is yet another way the internet, especially social media, is furthering a deep lack of trust in elected representatives. But that doesn't seem to matter much to the companies making money off ads like this, just like they don't care that their algorithms are directly making the world a more awful place to live in many other ways. In the end, Meta probably spends even less time trying to enforce these policies than they did in writing the closing line of their ad standards page on fraud and scams, which says in pretty poor English, quote, scams are a problem that affects people across platforms and industries, and we take a comprehensive approach to making our technologies a safer place, end quote. All right then, Meta, you keep pretending you've got a comprehensive approach to making your technologies a safer place, whatever that means. And hopefully the attorneys general and diligent groups like the Tech Transparency Project can keep showing how hollow your words actually are. And here's hoping that eventually even the users listen. I'm The Other Mac.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Katie Paul is director of the Tech Transparency Project. Her work specializes in tracking criminal activity on online platforms such as Facebook. She joined Amber to talk about how today's biggest tech companies are failing our kids.
Talking Tech.
Katie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
For many, many years, I've been covering online safety for kids, specifically these days, talking a lot about teen safety online, not just as a tech expert, but also as the mom of a 16-year-old who uses social media a lot. So I wanted to talk to you about what's happening at this point in time in terms of online safety for teens. Are we at a point where there's no turning back? Or in the research that you're doing, do you see any glimmers of hope?
Unfortunately, I think we've been at a point where there's no turning back. And the glimmers of hope would have to come from regulation because for over a decade now, it's been very clear that these mega sized big tech corporations are not going to police themselves. And the profit over people mantra really proliferates regardless of the age of the user, and that includes children.
One of the things that I always find surprising, and we've seen it especially as of the past few years, is this push towards teen accounts. Teen accounts will make things safer. We've seen this even from ChatGPT as of late. And this worries me as someone in this space. I know for a fact that teenagers are not going to go and ask their parents if they can get an account and then use all of the protocol to sign up for a separate account that their parents can monitor. What are these people thinking?
Well, I'm not sure if you follow some of the Senate hearings that have occurred on this, but there was a big hearing last week with two whistleblowers from Meta that were specifically focusing on the harms to children. And one of the opening statements from one of the whistleblowers, Casey Savage, who had dealt with research and the way that these platforms were affecting kids, I think is a really poignant example of this moment. And she basically highlighted the fact that these companies do nothing to address these problems until a regulator or a big PR storm puts it in the forefront. Then they scramble to create protections, parent tools, and teen safety things that their own internal tests have shown do not work or are not adopted. And they use it as a platform to say they're being responsible. This is something that we see time and again. These companies are not proactively doing this. ChatGPT's teen accounts came out because the company is being sued by multiple parents for encouraging teenagers, for the chatbot encouraging teenagers to kill themselves and explaining how to do it. This is something that, we're going to see over the years from any of these platforms. And the teen accounts are really a misnomer because we know that in many cases, the moderation is not effective enough or being effectively enforced in a way that's going to address this. If Meta really cared or ChatGPT really cared about these issues, they would not have fired thousands of human moderators. They would be hiring more to ensure that the major gaps in the technology moderation are filled in a way that doesn't harm people. But that's just simply not what we see from these companies.
One of the things that has worried me a lot, insofar as following many of these stories, is that it appears to me that there's so much money at stake. You already mentioned profits. But one thing I think a lot of people don't speak enough about is how companies such as Meta are actually influencing the narrative and the conversation around online safety. Your organization has done a lot of work in that space. Could you talk about that further?
Well, we recently actually did an investigation into Meta and how it finances the spin on the kids' safety online issue. One of the ways it does that is that for many years, Meta has been a major national sponsor of the National PTA, the National Parent Teachers Organization. What's notable about this is that school districts across the country and state AGs are part of what has now become an MDL, a multi district lawsuit that looks at the way that Meta has specifically harmed children. So In response to that, we see Meta getting closer and closer with the national PTA. We did a big report on this, and we found that one of the things the national PTA is most heavily promoting is Meta's teen accounts. That's something that they are holding events with Meta. They're pushing these, and we even saw responses from parents on the national PTA's Instagram. Parents who were outraged that the organization is being funded by Meta while they knowingly that this company is harming children. And we've also done investigations into Meta's teen Instagram accounts. Actually, just a year ago, yesterday, was the 1 year anniversary of that announcement. And first of all, the announcement of these teen accounts, many of the tools and protections they claim to be putting in place, they had actually been claiming for years they were already doing. And we found that they had not been doing those prior to that. They repackaged them as these teen accounts. We did some really basic tests in a report that just came out looking at Meta explicitly says that it doesn't allow fight content to be pushed to teens under a certain age. And we found there's huge loopholes in that. And not only was our teen account that we created, which was keyed to have less of the sensitive content pushed to it, not only was that teen account receiving graphic fight content, but content that went so far as dog and animal fighting, dogs ripping each other's throat out, something that would be traumatizing for anybody, let alone a teenager. And Meta has not only failed to fill these gaps, in response to the Washington Post, their changes actually made it worse, and the protections we had given them credit for in the report have been removed. And this is just another example of where we see the kind of failures on what are supposed to be their teen accounts, their safer versions of this content. In response to the assassination of Charlie Kirk, obviously there was a very widespread, extremely graphic video of the incident that was all over social media. So we used that same teen account in the midst of this crisis to check and see if that content was accessible to the teen because Meta says it makes sure that graphic content is blocked or hidden from view. And time and again, we saw that very graphic video being pushed to this teen account. Meta claimed that there's a lag in the way that its moderation tools are applied. So now, if you check from the teen account, the video is still accessible, but largely hidden. It's been a week. If the lag is that slow, how can we be, as the public, trust this company to keep kids safe? Millions of kids have likely seen that video already because of this alleged lag that one of the most sophisticated technology companies in the world is saying occurring on its team platform. So I think there's a lot to be questionable about, and we certainly cannot take these companies at their word because there's a lot of money at stake, and kids are the primary target user.
It's so frustrating. On the day that Charlie Kirk was assassinated, I was meeting my son, who I mentioned is 16, at his school. And I saw all of the kids come out of school. They can't have phones in school, so they turned their phones on as soon as they were waiting at the bus stop. And every single one of them was watching this assassination on social media. And in that very moment, I thought about the trauma that this brings into our kids' lives. And it's not a situation where, oh my goodness, hey, there's nothing we can do. Because I think you and I probably both remember the early days of social media and videos that were so graphic like that. In fact, they were blocked very quickly because there was something very innovative, which was human moderators and people who were actually on the ground. What is the problem? Is it that the algorithms are pushing out more of this content? Is it that there aren't enough of those human moderators? Or is it that, hey, it's just profits over people with companies like Meta?
It's all of the above. We finally see Congress catching up to the fact that this is the business model. The business model is to push content that is outrageous, that is eye catching, that keeps your eyeballs on the screen, whether it's because it's so shocking, like a car crash, you can't look away, or because it's enraging, or because you vehemently agree with whatever that point is. This is the business model. And the company's algorithms are key to maximize the profits, maximize eyeballs on screens. These whistleblowers last week that spoke before Congress, they weren't just tech engineers. They specialized in psychology. Meta is hiring people who understand neuroscience to make these products more addictive in a way that is not just a matter of somebody designing an algorithm or coding, changes into the platform. And we know that Meta has the ability to block relevant content. We know it because we don't see child sex abuse material all across our platforms like you would see on unregulated internet. We the reason the company makes more effort there is because the law is much more strict on that content regardless of the liability protections under section 230. You likely don't often see what is known as a pic rolling across your screen for the same reasons. We know the company is capable of addressing these things, and it's choosing not to do so because to do so would vastly reduce the company's profits. That's why when we see regulation like we're seeing in Europe, the Digital Services Act, that would issue fines for the company leaving up harmful content, illegal content, drug trafficking, terrorist content, there are major fines associated with that. And if the companies continue to go with this Wild West, those fines could really start to stack up. But as of right now, especially because these are American companies, this is European regulation. As of right now, those fines are just the cost of doing business until the United States members of Congress step up and address this. And I will say what has been notable in recent years is that amid what is probably historic by a nonpartisan historic separation among political views, we see very rare bipartisan support specifically on the issues of regulating tech and protection of children.
This is one of those things that always puzzles me because I think you're exactly right. This is a discussion that if you walk into any room of parents or adults, no matter what their political views are, overwhelmingly people will agree that we need to be able to do more in this space. It also strikes me that people have a weird relationship with regulation, and they think when we're talking about regulation in the big tech space when it comes to social media that is censorship. And yet everywhere in our society we have regulation. I can't get on an escalator without seeing some type of warning or caution sticker. So why is it that we're so afraid of regulating these big tech companies in the social media space?
Well, I think part of that is who's driving the narrative. And we have seen Meta and Google spend record amounts on lobbying members of Congress and pushing their content into media in a way that we didn't see with big tobacco or big oil. And those were the kind of classic big bad industries that sought profit over people. What's different with tech is it's something, people can choose not to smoke cigarettes and big tobacco doesn't affect them. But with tech, whether or not we like it, it's ingrained in our everyday lives. For depending on the country you're in, it's a critical form of communication with these social media platforms. For kids, even videos on YouTube for school can be something that is critical. These are really important pieces of infrastructure in our daily lives, and yet they are some of the most unregulated across the board. And one of the things these tech companies have really pushed is that any regulation is damaging the free market. It's damaging their ability to innovate. They're kind of drawing on the 1996 inspiration behind Section 230, but it's been, 2 decades, 3 decades since then, and technology's changed a lot. These are not mom and pop, run out of your garage companies. These are some of the most profitable companies, technology companies in the world that we see. And they also have some of the greatest responsibility in terms of how they drive the narrative online in the US and around the world. I think it's important to remember that US regulation is the biggest threat for these companies. And the internet that we get is like the most regulated version that they have. What is being pushed to adults, to kids, all around the world is even worse because what moderators they do have largely speak English. And so this is something that in a globalized world, we really need to keep pressure on these companies because the damage reverberates so far. Um, and, getting back to you mentioned your son and all of the teens seeing that video. I see in the research that I do a lot of bad things online, a lot of graphic things. And seeing that video was jarring for me. Um, when I am aware what's going to happen in the video and I'm used to seeing that content. So for a teenager, that's even harder for your mind to grasp. It also kind of blurs the lines between what's reality and what's TV, what's online. Um, and that's something that we still don't see companies owning up to. And another reason you see so many whistleblowers coming out year after year trying to raise alarm about how companies like Meta are profiting while harming children.
It's also pretty jarring that we're seeing late night talk show hosts that are getting essentially pulled from the air for saying certain things. And yet on the internet, we have some of these gory and grotesque videos and whatnot floating around. And I do want to evolve the conversation from just some of those more graphic videos into some of the other harms, because something I've been reading a lot about, and certainly I've seen your organization talk about as well, is the rise in gambling among young people. They're seeing a lot of gambling ads across social media, and there's been a lot of cases of young people actually getting addicted to gambling. This feels like yet another layer of these challenges that we're facing today.
Well, the advertising architecture, which is the primary product for these companies, I'm not sure if you remember back in 2018, the first time these tech CEOs went before Congress, and one of them said, Mr. Zuckerberg, how does your company make money? And he said, Senator, we run ads. And they do, they run ads. That's what everything that we see is really pointing to, is trying to get our eyes on those ads. And because the advertising is such a critical part of their infrastructure, they really do not apply a lot of their standards when it comes to review. We've tested this time and again with ads targeted toward people under the age of 18 for things like drugs, guns. And we found last year that Meta was running hundreds of ads for drug trafficking. I'm not talking about prescription pills. I'm talking about ads that had photos with piles of cocaine on a scale. And it reviews, approves, and collects the money from those ads. Now, what Meta says to media when they're confronted with this is, oh, well, this is obviously against our policies and we remove it when we become aware of it. But the damage is done. They're not refunding that money. They keep the money. They remove the ad once it's finished running, and the damage has already been done. Users have been reached, people have contacted that entity. And this is really something that's pretty basic. If any other outlet on television, in print media, were to run ads for drug traffickers, it would be the end of that outlet. And we don't see any repercussions or accountability for these companies when they do the same thing. And it really should be, there should be outrage among other traditional media who have to play by completely different rules to monetize their, in some cases, their struggling platforms, their struggling websites, while companies like Meta are allowed to repeatedly run ads for things like illegal gambling pushed to kids, drug trafficking, weapons. These are all things that we've identified ads for, and yet there are no repercussions for that.
The argument from some of these tech leaders that I have seen in the past is that it's just too difficult to do this. I don't buy into that. But what can be done? Because I think it's fair to say for someone like yourself in an organization that has done so much research, what is the best thing to do in terms of that regulation? What does that regulation look like? And how can it be applied without impacting people's right to speech?
Well, certainly these are private companies. So free speech, while it's one of the many traps that these companies get into when it comes to the dialogue. The other one is what you mentioned. It's just too complicated. They can't moderate at scale. You just can't expect them to do that. They have no problem moderating at scale if they're required to do so. I think we have to remember how advanced these technology companies are. They've really written the rules of the 21st century because they are so technologically advanced and so well resourced. When we look at something like Meta laying off thousands of moderators and saying it's doing cost cutting while simultaneously hiring an AI engineer for a $250,000 contract, it's very clear resources are not the problem, nor is technological advancement. It's a matter of whether or not they are required to do so. And I think when we look at what these companies were starting to do when they thought there was a threat of regulation. So around 2018, 2020, after the 2016, influence online in the 2016 election became a big talking point. We see these companies really promoting the fact that they're hiring thousands of moderators and they're implementing all of these tools and putting this much money invested toward this. They even had a war room for elections that they highly promoted for Meta. And that regulation didn't come. So there's no repercussions for what they're doing. So what do? Let go of the moderators, not focusing on a war room anymore. Zuckerberg announces in January they're going to roll back how hard they apply their moderation tools. And it's clear that even the threat of pressure was forcing them to do more internally. But when it became obvious that regulation wasn't actually imminent, the companies pulled back all of those protections. And we get what we have now with what we see, where kids can access incredibly harmful content, even if they don't go looking for it. These algorithms put it in front of them regardless.
I think when I look at a company like Meta, I get especially concerned because now they're going into virtual spaces. Now they're launching AI companions and chatbots, right? Even though I think they've massively screwed up the online experience for so many of us, especially kids, and done so much harm, it's not like they're pausing and fixing the spaces that they've already built. They're layering complexity on top of them that could potentially lead to more harms. What do you think about the rise in chatbots and AI companions, specifically in terms of how often kids are using these for mental health and other issues as well?
Well, what's really concerning is that the AI bubble isn't just happening in terms of how these companies are developing, but it's also the members of Congress, policymakers have pretty much entirely shifted their focus to what to do on AI. We haven't solved the social media problem yet. Nothing has been put in place that protects that issue. And AI is moving way faster than social media development ever did, and much faster in a way that's harder and harder for policymakers to catch up with at the pace of policymaking in the United States, let alone for many of the older members of Congress to understand the technology enough to figure out where the problems are and what would be effective pressure points in regulation. So this is all something that's playing to the advantage of these big tech companies as they seek this historic, rise in this unregulated Wild West. There's a lot that needs to be addressed very quickly. And I think that when you look at things like this AI moratorium that was supposed to be in the last government funding bill, that would have stopped any states from being able to do anything to regulate AI for a decade. Now, fortunately, that was pulled, but that's something that, look at how far AI has gotten and what harms have been caused just in the past 2 years. A decade of that growth without any even threat of regulation is incredibly concerning. And this is something that I think when we look at these issues, it's not just kids that we need to worry about. We have to worry about ourselves. And I grew up, Facebook was created when I was in college. And I understand what the wild west of that social media and the rise of it looks like. My parents aren't allowed on social media because they don't understand that. They're aware of that, but they're just as susceptible to being influenced by that content and those algorithms as children. And frankly, kids probably have greater digital literacy than all of us at this point because they were born and raised in this universe. So I think that when we think about these threats, it's not just related to teens, which is a big concern, but ourselves, our parents, there's a lot for people to manage in this current era, and we're really being left for self-protection. We're not getting help from lawmakers, and we're certainly not going to be getting help from the companies.
I'm glad you brought that up just to wrap things up as far as it impacting adults and grandparents. I think about my mom, for example. I went on to her Facebook account, which she loves because she has so many friends there. And I scrolled through her feed, and it took me, I don't know, 5 minutes to actually find a post from anyone she knew. It was just all garbage ads, AI generated ads. I
AI
mean,
slop. Yep.
It was just absolutely exploiting her as a user among millions and millions of other people. So very, very disgusting behavior from a company that should really know better. I wish we had a little bit more time. So before we go, just for people who are interested in reading more about the incredible work that your organization is doing, where is the best place for them to go?
They can find all of our reports at techtransparencyproject.org. We also have info about lawmakers on both sides of the aisle that have written letters to the companies on these issues. So there's a lot there about where things are going, and we have entire reports focusing on harms to children if you're interested in that issue, but some of the reports on other harms would be of interest to all of us. And I encourage your followers to take a scroll and see what sticks out to them.
Katie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Katie and Amber. Coming up next, we discuss new and sophisticated online scams that are more difficult to spot than ever, even for us tech-savvy individuals.
You're listening to The Amber Mack Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Cybercriminals are innovating at record speed. They're using deceptive threats targeting everyday users, from fake CAPTCHA scams to app impersonations. Tony Anscombe, the chief security evangelist at ESET, joined Amber in our Toronto studio to share more on how to stay safe.
Tony, cybercriminals are getting more sophisticated in terms of their attacks online. What are some of the ways that they are scamming users on the internet?
Well, so cybercrime does evolve, you're correct, and it evolves in the same way things evolve in other businesses. I mean, if we think of criminals running a business. But one way we've seen them evolve recently is, you've probably seen the performance scams of historically, where they turn around and tell you there's something wrong with your machine and it could perform better, and click here to get more performance or to do something to your device. Well, they've switched that up. And what they've realized is they're using the same infrastructure and the same delivery method, but just a different type of scam at the front, where it uses CAPTCHA. You know, when you go to a website, you see that it presents you with the picture of the school bus or the traffic lights. Now, I don't know why I can never get these right, by the way. Yeah, I can click on all those. I can click on all the squares with the traffic lights, and then it shows me a bus and says I got it wrong. Yeah, how did I do that? But what they've done is, and latterly you'll see the one that says, "Are you a robot?" or "Confirm you're not a robot." I don't know what a robot says to that, by the way. But you know, it then asks you to do something else. So it's interesting because it's actually, when you see a CAPTCHA, you have implicit trust, right? That CAPTCHA puts on the screen, and it's nearly like they're authenticating you. I mean, they're not, but they're authenticating you're real. So you have this trust with it. Now, if it asks you to do something else, so you click on that "I'm not a robot," or "I'm human," and if it turns around and says, "Right, Amber, now could you click these 3 keys on your keyboard?" Would you do it?
Probably, yes.
Right. And that cut and pastes malware into a script, runs in the browser, and hey presto, they're off. They're now installing malware on your device, info stealing malware or ransomware, whatever the payload is. And of course, it's a social engineering tactic, because they had you in that authentication, that trust moment. You never think that the CAPTCHA is the thing that's going to actually be malicious. So there's a great that's a great example of an evolution of how cybercrime does actually progress.
What about attacks in terms of people spending more and more time on mobile devices? Because it is also true that, hey, it used to be that we would be sitting at computers and maybe paying a little bit more attention. But now a lot of people are on their phones, they're in transit, they're on tiny little screens. How are cyber criminals taking advantage of the time people are spending on mobile?
Well, the tiny little screens are super interesting. So when you think about things like deep fakes, and they're moving in some of that direction for financial scams. Now, I'd say look for the flickering of the eyes, the kind of out of sync of mouth and things like that with a video. And of course, you can't see that on a small screen. It's really difficult. But one of the other interesting ones we've seen recently is something we've called kaleidoscope. Now, what that is where the cybercriminal will put up an official app, a legitimate app, into one of the official stores, and then create a second variant, an evil twin variant of the app, that then delivers something else. And in the case of kaleidoscope that we saw, it was actually bombarding the user with advertising. So it's adware, which is going to be really annoying on a mobile device. Interestingly, the app looks legitimate. And the reason we've called it's an evil twin is it has the same app ID. So from the advertiser's perspective, it looks like the advertising is actually coming from the legitimate app. And therefore, they don't detect that actually this is a piece of malware that's delivering their ads onto somebody's device without permission.
That is absolutely terrifying. And I'm curious, just as people are hearing it and some of the new terms that you're mentioning, what type of information are these cyber criminals looking for? What do they plan to do with it?
Well, of course, identity theft is a big thing. If I can steal enough personal information about you, then potentially I can go and create fraud around your identity. I can steal your bank account information or your payment card information, etc. Or I might be piecing information together with other information that's already been breached. So I get a wider profile of you. Or I might be gathering enough information that I could then spear phish you in effect of, hey, Amber, I saw you went to this restaurant, or I've seen you do this, or, and suddenly the spear phishing, you're going to, that's, and give them more information, and that's the more information they will then use to make money from you.
What about people who are targets of these attacks? Because there was a point in time where typically it was an older population who often these cyber criminals went after. How is that changing?
Well, I think from a certain element, it's both. I mean, there's the older population who I think are still susceptible, but I've certainly seen younger people, because we're all they're all in a rush, and they will click a link without actually too much consideration. I think the older person clicks on it having considered it and still clicks on it. So I think there are just different demographics. And of course, potentially the older person has more to steal. They may have more bank accounts, more savings, et cetera, so they may be more susceptible. But I don't think there's any particular demographic that doesn't have something worth stealing. The other thing to think about as well is small business owners. If you can then get into a small business, so for example, a ransomware attack on a small business can be very, very profitable for cyber criminals too.
Before we get into some of the ways that people can stay safe, you mentioned a term there that I would love you to expand just for people who are unfamiliar with it. You said the term social engineering. What exactly does that mean?
Well, take the case I just gave you with the capture. I'm playing on your emotion. I'm playing on you socially because you think you're in the authentication. So social, or in other instances, a scammer may contact you in turn and say, I'm from the help desk, there's something wrong with your machine. They're playing on your emotion and they're engineering the outcome of it. So they're playing on your trust element, I think is probably the best way to view it. I mean, you often hear in business scams where they get duped with ransomware. It typically starts with social engineering. So for example, the cyber criminal may actually physically call a help desk and ask for a password reset. I'm traveling, I'm this person, I can't get access, you really need to help me out, I've got this deal that needs to be closed, etc. They're socially engineering the person on the help desk to get them to reset the password for them, when they're not actually the person whose password it is. So it's just playing on human behavior.
What can people do to stay safe? Because it seems to me that there are more and more threats, that cyber criminals are getting more sophisticated. What can individuals do in terms of staying safe from all of these threats that exist today?
Well, firstly, be very cautious about clicking something. So if something lands in your inbox, in your email, personally, I'd always turn and say, well, go directly to a browser, log on to whatever it is that is telling you there's a message for you and look directly. Don't click the link in email. But come at everything with a zero trust viewpoint. And this is a term that's used in business about cybersecurity. But I think it's really good for consumers to take that attitude as well. Trust nothing, and then verify everything. Because if you come at every click or everything that lands in your inbox, SMS, or however it presents itself, then I think you're in a good spot to stay safe. But also make sure you've got cybersecurity software, because phishing links and some of those clicks will get picked up by cybersecurity software and blocked.
You write a lot about cybersecurity, and I know ESET does a lot of research. Where can people go to get more information?
Well, so there's two sites that we have. Our research is published on welivesecurity.com, and there's a lot of help and assistance you can get on there as well. So there's some deep research and there's some more useful research for consumers as well. And then eset.com is where you'll find our products.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Tony.
Oh, my pleasure, Amber.
Thanks, Tony and Amber, and thanks to ESET for supporting this episode of The Amber Mac Show. Amber, we covered a lot in today's episode. The internet's a frightening place, but it's good to see some great people like today's guests fighting back.
Absolutely. I think the key word here is holding these companies accountable for their actions, and I hope we do see more of that. Now, just wanted to mention that Jeff and I are going to be doing a live event in Halifax in November where you can come and watch us tape an episode of the show on stage. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the coming weeks. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Please keep those comments coming on social, and we'll see you soon.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.